Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I'll be speaking with Rebecca Guntern, Chief Commercial Officer at Sandoz, for a conversation on the golden decade for generics and biosimilars as so many blockbuster drugs come off patent. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hello.
Now, 2026 is the year of a major wave of pharmaceutical patent expirations, with numerous blockbuster drugs spanning diabetes, immunology, cardiovascular, oncology, and other therapeutic areas on the verge of losing market exclusivity. Just one prominent example is Novo Nordisk's GLP-1 therapy, Ozempic, for instance. But before we dive headfirst into our discussion today, Rebecca, I was wondering if you could first of all provide a brief introduction to yourself for listeners and describe the personal journey that took you to today.
Yeah, listen, I have started my career in the pharmaceutical industry 30 years ago. First working in clinical research and then becoming a sales rep at Roche, moving to Merck Sharp and Dohme, where I had different commercial roles. And then I started to join Sandoz in 2007. Had different roles, country head of Switzerland and commercial roles with bigger size of opportunities and responsibilities. And last year, I became then the Chief Commercial Officer, oversight, seeing basically the entire pipeline selection, portfolio selection, but also ensuring that we have the right commercial strategy for the in-market portfolio.
Thank you, Rebecca. Now, talking about commercial strategy, Sandoz has a broad global portfolio that comprises about 1,300 quality generic and biosimilar medicines. For those who are perhaps wondering about the difference between the two, generic medicines contain the same active ingredients as the reference medicines, with identical quality and safety profiles, where biosimilars are, quote, new versions of a type of medicine called biologics, powerful medicines made from living cells. And indeed, in 2024, Sandoz provided more than 900 million such patient treatments, generating more than $19 billion in direct savings for US and European healthcare systems alone. So, Rebecca, I was wondering if you could define for us this golden decade of biosimilars and explain why the current wave of blockbuster biologics is losing exclusivity in such a significant manner for patient access and healthcare budgets.
Sure. So listen, we're really entering I would say, unparalleled opportunity in the next decade. And this is the largest opportunity this industry has seen in the history. And that's why we're saying we're entering a golden decade, because we see tripling of the LOE landscape, which is the loss of exclusivity value. So in the last decade, we saw roughly 200 billion of assets losing exclusivity. If we look ahead in the next decade, this is going to triple to above 650 billion of actually originator assets losing exclusivity. So that's why it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for healthcare systems in terms of savings. But equally, and I would say even more important for patients to gain access to these biologic treatments, because 50% of the number I just mentioned before is actually falling into biologic treatments. And that's where I see a huge opportunity for patients globally to get earlier those broader access to these life-changing medicines. The second piece, why we would call it the golden decade, is that fundamentally we see a huge development when it comes to regulatory streamlining, which means that we have an opportunity, and this is going to really accelerate the biosimilar market entry, to develop them faster. So I think we're going to see 2 to 3 years less in development timelines, but also more cost efficient, because of course with the regulatory streamlining, the so-called phase 3 studies, the clinical studies are not necessary anymore. So the combination is a fantastic opportunity. And I think as Sandoz, we're truly excited to step into this. And of course, we're well positioned to capitalize on this unparalleled opportunity, being really pure play in generics and biosimilars, and currently the leading global company in biosimilars, with, I would say, a strong pipeline ahead of us.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I was wondering if we could sort of tunnel down into that regulatory streamlining that you mentioned a moment ago and discuss further the policy changes or regulatory changes that are still needed in order to fully unlock this potential of biosimilars.
Yeah, first, I think these regulatory changes, as I quickly touched on, are really important because we have so much proof over the last 2 decades. Because if you think back, the first biosimilar launched is exactly 20 years ago, which was Omnidrop in Europe in 2006. So since then, we have seen in Europe alone 7 billion patient treatment days coming from biosimilars. So, of course, there's a really strong evidence when it comes to biosimilar efficacy, but of course also safety profile. So now this regulatory streamlining is going to enable us to bring even more biosimilars to market, specifically also smaller asset when we think about the size of value. And this is what we also call the biosimilar void, that fundamentally what you see over the next decade, over 100 products and assets are going to lose exclusivity. Many of them are smaller ones below 1 billion or 500 million. And of course, with this change in regulatory requirements, there's an opportunity to tap into those assets. If we think broader about policies, I think we always need to ensure that we promote a sustainable market environment for biosimilars, but also one which is truly driving access for patients. What I believe is important is also to look into procurement policies. So the way we really buy those biosimilars. And I think we need to move away from price-only tenders, to give you an example, like this one single slot tenders, into multi-slot tenders, where you really also recognize, and I would say, bring these elements and criteria beyond price into the game, being it quality, resilience of supply, and fundamentally also patient services. And there is still a way to go. We do see some first good examples in the Nordics, in France, where fundamentally criteria beyond price are being implemented. But I do believe we need to continue to see more elements coming into these policies.
Thank you, Rebecca. So you've just mentioned the Nordics, France there. Perhaps geographically speaking then, how do you foresee that the biosimilars sector will continue to innovate in Europe and beyond? And what should we expect from the next generation of biosimilars, as you briefly touched upon a moment ago?
Well, if you look at the so-called decade, at the NOE landscape, of course, we tap into new technologies. For the time being, it's, I would say, roughly 80% are going to be MOPs, which is monoclonal antibodies. But I think then the next generation is also going to tap into ADCs, which is antibody-drug conjugates, where you would call them also the divided mistsides, right? The combination between MAPs and chemotherapy, which is a very interesting concept. We're also going to see biospecific, trispecifics, even cell and gene and radioligands, which are going to lose exclusivity. So I would say part of the innovation is technology, a different mode of actions. And then the other part, of course, we're also entering new therapeutic areas. So for the time being, you see there's a lot of assets being launched in immunology and oncology. But if you look ahead, we're going to see new therapeutic areas like ophthalmology, osteoporosis, but even rare disease, where you look into orphan drugs, which is really an interesting concept to see how do we bring biosimilars also to a smaller population and make sure that they gain broader and earlier access to these life-changing medications.
Just brilliant. So that brings me to my final question for you today, Rebecca. When it comes to biosimilars, what are Sandoz's ambitions for the near future?
I would say we have very bold ambitions because we're starting from a strong position today, right? I mean, as mentioned, we have 13 products already in the market. have 28 currently in the pipeline, and we are global leaders across the different regions. So I believe we need to think bold and big to continue to create this access for patients. And I would say the way I would define success is that everyone gets access to this high quality, and I would say again, life-changing medicines independently where they sit, the location, but also the financial situation they're in. So our ambition, and I think our goal, is to really provide and drive access to those medicines for a broader population to make sure you get earlier and you get broader access. And fundamentally, if you take an example, because we always think far away, but I would say if you think about Poland, only 3% of the population have access to even biologics. I'm not even talking about biosimilars. So there's a huge opportunity to provide to more patients access with the wave ahead on LOEs, but even with the current portfolio we're having. Another good example is in Germany, where we see with the introduction of biosimilars, in this case, TNF-alpha, more patients with rheumatoid arthritis can be treated for less cost, a huge contribution to the sustainability of healthcare system. But even more importantly, they also got this access to these medicines much earlier on. So we talk about 1 year earlier access to biologic treatment versus traditional NSAIDs, and I would say more advantage in modern medicines. So this is what we are aiming for. And I think, again, we're also investing quite significantly to build a fully end-to-end integrated development and manufacturing capabilities. You have seen with the media releases, we are investing over 1 billion into manufacturing footprint in Europe. And I do believe this is going to be important to provide access, but also sustainable access and supplies resilience for patients in Europe.
Well, I don't know what listeners think, but this landscape of modern medicine you've just described, that's something to look forward to indeed. Thank you very much for your time today, Rebecca. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Nicole.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.